Yo, what is good, everyone? Zik here, back in Eternum. With the Greatsword coming out a couple weeks ago and the fresh start servers coming out today, I've been thinking a lot about what build I want to play leveling up on a fresh server. Originally at launch, I mained bow, sword, and shield for pretty much the whole way. I did some magic like mid 40s and 50s, but for the most part, I was playing bow, sword, and shield. Super fun, super efficient leveling build, and so this is basically the next iteration of that with the greatsword, and I just love the combo of bow greatsword. It's just way too badass. You just got a giant sword and a bow. Enough said, I guess. So in this video, I'm basically going to map out a guide of how I plan to play this build from 1 to 60 on a fresh start server. The core of it is really going to be about build order, and we're going to get into some of the specifics of the weapon mastery talents and how to sort of utilize those in combat to level effectively and just murder everything at maximal speed and enjoyment. And then I'm also going to try to touch on some supplemental stuff like attribute prioritization, gear perks that you should be looking at, gear weight, that kind of stuff. So real quick, for anyone interested in seeing this progression live, I'm actually going to try to roleplay the entire New World story. And I started another channel because the algorithm really doesn't like when I post stuff that's not PvP related. So that channel is Zikorik RP, and I'm going to be basically live streaming this whole journey with this new character on this new server. And then I'm also actually going to try to start live streaming more PvP again on this channel. And so this is going to kind of be my PvP like build guide channel, and then that new channel is going to be when I do some of this more like immersive fantasy roleplay stuff. So if you're interested, check that out. There's a link below. But yeah, let's get started. All right, so diving in, I just wanted to give sort of a quick preview of the builds as a whole. We're going to get into the progression of how to build it, like 1 to 20 for the weapon level and stuff like that, but this is just kind of a quick preview of what we're looking at and what abilities we're taking. And something just real quick personally that I really like is, I think especially for leveling in like world PvE, it's really fun to have both a ranged and a melee weapon. Instead of being double melee or instead of being double ranged, I think you kind of get access to both elements of the game. So you have that sort of aiming FPS tracking mechanic with your ranged weapon, and then when you get into melee combat, you have more of that Souls-like fighter reaction dodge block type game. And so using two of those together lets you open up fights with a ranged weapon and then dive into the melee when stuff gets close to you. And as far as like grinding the game, I personally really enjoy that style of combat. Additionally, having a ranged weapon, especially like a bow or a musket that kind of have ridiculous range, you can tag mobs from far away. So if you're running up to a quest mob that a bunch of people are beating the shit out of, you can just whip out your bow, rip a heavy shot into a pen shot in the dome, and a lot of times that's enough damage to get you kill credit for that mob. And so not only is it good for initiating combat, it's good for tagging mobs that are a distance off. All right, so we're going to start off taking a deep look at the bow build, and then we're going to get into the greatsword, and then we're going to talk about kind of the synergy between the two. So for the bow build path, we're basically focusing on maxing out damage so we can get that sort of assassin burst at the beginning of every one of our engages with mobs or with players. We still pick up most of our abilities fairly early, and then later on in the progression, you'll be picking up more of the mobility tools on the skirmisher side to help keep yourself safe. But it's really focused on damage. And there's two key talents that actually change the way your arrow flies through the air. So the actual trajectory of your arrow. So the first one is this aim true talent up at the top right of Hunter. And that's going to make your heavy attack arrows fly faster. And so if you're tracking something and holding a heavy attack and you let that arrow go, with this talent, there's going to be a different trajectory. Like your arrow will reach its target faster than if you don't have this talent. So that's the first one, and then the second one is this arrow range. That's going to increase the distance your arrow travels before being affected by gravity, essentially before it starts to drop by 100%. And so these two talents together basically change the trajectory of your arrow. They change the way it flies through the air. And so in my opinion, I would never run a bow build without these two. And I think you want to try to scoop these two talents as early as possible so you can get used to aiming and shooting the bow in that way with faster heavy attacks and 100% increased range before your arrows start to drop both on heavy and light. So those are super important. We're picking those up 2nd and 7th. But the very first one we're going to start with is this evasive tactics. And so this gives you 15% more damage for 5 seconds after dodging. So literally every time you go to take a bow shot to like open a fight, you're going to want to get a quick dodge in and then hold right click to get your aim going. So then second one we scoop is aim true. That's going to give you 10% more damage on your heavy attacks, make your arrows fly faster. Third one is going to be pen shot. So pen shot, in my opinion, is like the best bow ability in the game. It basically gives you like an instant heavy attack that you can sort of weave between your autos. And so you can get a really nice cancel going at the end of your light or heavy attack animation. So you can do a light or heavy attack into a really quick pen shot. And that's not even mentioning any of like the actual penetration mechanics where you can get some really cool shit lined up if you have, you know, stuff in a row that you can pen through. But just as a shot on a single target is a very good thing to weave into your auto attack rotation with bow. So fourth, we're going to hop back over to Skirmisher and grab Evade Shot. There's basically 2 versions of this build that are going to be equally powerful for different situations. So the first one is with Evade Shot. The second one was with Rain of Arrows. And I'll show that at the end, but basically Evade Shot, I think, is going to be better for leveling. Evade Shot is better for surviving, for that mobility tool of the increased distance you get with it, and then the stagger you get if you actually hit the arrow. It's a really good separation tool for PvP and PvE. Just a really effective tool at keeping you alive and keeping space when you have like 1v1 or 1vx situations. And then Rain of Arrows really excels when you have the opportunity to AoE. And so if you're doing a dungeon, a war, an invasion, you know, OPR, you could kind of go with either or depending on your playstyle. But you can basically swap the first 2 talents of Evade Shot into the first 2 talent of Rain of Arrows and have the same exact build. And so you can just spend a little bit of Azoth to flip between having that AoE burst with Rain of Arrows and the bleed, and then having that mobility spacing tool with the stagger with Evade Shot. So for the sake of leveling, we're going to take Evade Shot. We're going to wait on getting the second talent. We're going to go back over to Hunter and grab Explosive Arrow. And so this is actually a newer talent. This used to be Split Shot, which was a questionable ability, which is probably why they changed it. So this one's a little newer to me, but it's pretty cool. I think Explosive Arrow is like equivalent to Poison Shot in a lot of ways, where it kind of gives you this AoE ability you can throw down with a dot on it. I think both are viable. Both could work. You could pull these ones out of Explosive Arrow and put them in the 3 in Poison Shot with direct hit, and you could still get to concussion. So if you like Poison Arrow more, you could flip these explosive talents over to Poison and accomplish a similar thing. But I've been leaning into the newer Explosive Shot and feeling it out. I think the nerf to Poison Shot, where direct hit used to add 100% damage on top of the 50, so you got 150% damage when you nailed someone with it. Now it just bumps the 50 up to 100. And so when you hit someone with it, it's 100% arrow damage instead of 150, so it doesn't have that like pen shot feel that it used to have when you direct hit it. And so Explosive Arrow in the end is going to do more damage because you have the same 50% base damage on the arrow if you hit, but then it explodes and deals an extra 135% damage to all targets within a radius. And so if you actually connect the shot, you're getting 185% weapon damage just on like the base talent without any upgrades versus the 50% on Poison Shot. And then the upgrades for this talent are pretty solid, basically giving it a burn, like a little dot to give you 80% more damage over 10 seconds. And then the last one basically increasing that direct hit damage up 40%, but like having the radius of the explosion. So right after Explosive Arrow, instead of getting the upgrades, we're going to go to Opening Strike, and that's going to make your heavy attacks deal 20% increased damage to foes with 100% health. So for PvE, for questing, this ability is super dope because you're just going to get a flat 20% increase on pretty much everything you go to attack for that first shot. So right after that, we're going to grab Arrow Range, which is that second ability that actually affects how your arrow travels through the air. So by your 7th point in bow, your arrows are going to be shooting exactly how they will for the rest of the time you play bow. And I don't think I would play a bow build at this point that doesn't run these 2 talents, Aim True and Arrow Range, just because it gives you such a better ability to hit those long range, heavy attacks for like huge assassin damage. And then right after that, we're going to grab Surprise Attack, and that's going to give you 20% extra damage to any foe that you haven't damaged in the last 10 seconds. And then we're going to grab Long Range back at the top of Hunter, and that's going to give you 15% more damage to foes at least 10 meters away. So with this talent in Long Range, we've essentially completed our max damage stack for opening heavy shots with bow. So when we add all this up, you're actually going to have an insane amount of extra damage on your heavy open shot on pretty much every mob you engage on. So you're going to dodge right before you pull back, so you have 15% more damage from evasive tactics. Your aim true is going to give your heavy attacks 10% more, so that's 25. Your opening strikes give you 20% more damage against foes with 100% health, so that's 45% extra damage. And then surprise attack is going to give you 20% more damage if you haven't done anything to them in the last 10 seconds, so that's 65% extra damage. And then long range is going to give you 15% more if they're at least 10 meters away. So if you dodge and heavy attack shoot something in the head from more than 10 meters away, you're going to have 80% increased damage on that heavy attack, and it's going to be a guaranteed critical because you're hitting them in the face. So the idea with this leveling build is essentially like rushing sort of these really high damage passive assassin talents to make that opening heavy shot just absolutely rip. So now that we have that damage stack covered with just 9 points into the bow, so bow level 10, you're going to be able to get all this. We're going to start scooping up more of the utility mobility stuff. So I'm going to go back to Skirmisher and get this evasive knockback, which is basically what gives the stagger to your evade shot, which makes it a lot better and more reliable to create space. And then before we pick up more movement talents in Skirmisher, we're going to go back to Hunter and finish out our max damage stack. So we're going to go 11th talent in Flame Arrow to get the burn on our explosive arrow. So basically 80% more weapon damage over 10 seconds. And then we're going to go Hawkeye. And so this is going to let you heal up for 10% of damage done from your headshots, which is absolutely clutch for a bunch of different scenarios. Sustain while you're questing, just like churning through mobs. You know, really good for like fights in PvP, getting like those big close range headshots with like a dodge pen and stuff like that. I absolutely love this talent. And then the last point before we get the keystone is this bullseye, and that's just going to increase the crit chance of your bow. This one, in my opinion, is like a little less valuable than others because if you're headshotting, this talent's doing nothing for you because that headshot's basically like a guaranteed crit. And so this basically makes it so like your pen shot, your evade shot, your explosive shot all have a 10% higher crit chance if you're like not headshotting them, or if you're unable to get the headshot, if you're just doing body shots. So like this one's honestly better for PvP because it's a lot harder to get reliable headshots in PvP. A lot of times you're just trying to tag them wherever you can. And then for the fourth theme point, we are getting the keystone in Hunter, which is concussion. And this really leans into that sort of headshot assassin build we're going for. So it's going to give you 20% more damage on your headshots, and you're going to get a 50% chance to get your arrow back. So when you're doing the opener we talked about, where you dodge, pull a heavy attack, and dome something from more than 10 meters away, that's going to take that 80% bonus damage to 100% bonus damage. So at level 14 of the bow, your opener with a heavy attack is going to be hitting for 100% more on mobs at 100% health that you haven't attacked in the last 10 seconds that are more than 10 meters away. So this kind of completes the damage stack. There's a couple more we get that give us little boosts here and there. But once you get 14 talent points in bow and get to concussion, you're going to really be ripping. You're going to really be feeling it when you're getting these like dome opener headshots on stuff. So right after that, I'm going to get contained detonation, which is basically just going to up the explosion damage of your explosive arrow by 40%, but have the radius. And so like for questing, churning through a lot of single mobs, I think this is the way to go. If you're focused on AoE, I would probably pull this one out and put it somewhere else. And then we're going to hop back over to Skirmisher and get the last couple mobility tools that aren't quite as important for PvE, but are super useful for PvP and like moving around the world. And so dodge and weave at your 16th point is going to give you 10% haste for 2 seconds after you dodge. So this pairs nicely with evasive tactics, where every time you dodge, you're getting that 15% bonus damage for 5 seconds, and then you're getting the 10% haste for 2 seconds. And then after that, snatching archer speed. So now you get 10% haste whenever you swap to your bow. So now like running throughout the world, you can just pull out your bow every 5 seconds to get, you know, to always be running 10% faster. And then the last one on this side of Skirmisher is Mark. And so this is going to give you 10% more damage to foes suffering from a debuff. And so the only debuff you have in this build is your explosive shot burn. And so basically as soon as you get your burn on something for those 10 seconds that they're burning, you're going to be able to hit them for 10% more damage. And then the very final talent in bow is this finishing shot. And that's going to give you 20% more damage against targets below 50% health. So this is like a little more of like a finishing ability. Really good for PvP, getting that like last kill shot and stuff like that. So this is the completed build. You're basically really leaning into this idea of being like a bow assassin and opening your fights with like a heavy attack to the head before that mob or person like closes the gap and engages you in melee, in which case you're going to switch to your greatsword. And so we will talk about that next. A couple quick tips with the bow. They added this visual and sound indicator for the heavy draw, where as soon as it's charged, you get this little graphic on your arrow and that little sort of like string taut sound. And it's pretty fast now, way faster than it used to be like a year ago when the game came out. And so really getting used to this like dodge, pull, heavy shot timing, I think is a good skill to work on. And then you really want to try to use your abilities to cancel the animation at the end of your light or heavy attack. So if you look when you shoot a light or heavy attack, your character sort of takes a second to pull back another arrow. In that gap, like right at the end of the shot, you can start an ability animation instead of having to continue through the end of that auto animation. And so I think pen shot is the best one to do this with. You can also do it with explosive shot. You can also do it with evade shot. But, you know, really trying to weave your abilities in to maximize the uptime of your damage by getting those little animation cancels can really add up. Also keep in mind the benefits you get from dodging, the 15% damage boost you get from evasive tactics, and then the 10% haste boost you get from dodge and weave. So pretty much every 5 seconds that you're fighting with bow, you're going to want to weave in a little dodge to keep that damage stack up. All right, so now getting into the greatsword. So obviously I don't have as much experience with the greatsword as I have with the bow, because it's only been out for a couple weeks, but I have been messing around with it quite a bit, just been leveling it as I go through the Brimstone Sands questline and using it with bow mostly, kind of practicing the synergy. I think one of the really cool things about greatsword that kind of give it some depth of mechanics different than other weapons are the stances. And so basically you have onslaught stance and you have defiance stance, and you enter those stances generally after you use an ability for that tree. So if you use one of the onslaught abilities, right after that you're going to have the 10-second onslaught buff. If you use a defiance stance ability, right after that you're going to have the 10-second defiance stance buff. So when you're just standing there with the greatsword without either of these stances active, you're at 100% weapon damage. As soon as you go into onslaught stance, you're going to get 15% increased damage, but you're also going to take 15% increased damage yourself. And then your heavy attacks are going to charge twice as fast, but they consume 10 stamina. And Path of Defiance is very similar. It's just kind of like the opposite. So your outgoing damage is reduced by 15%. Your damage taken is also reduced by 15%. And then your heavy attacks actually block incoming attacks while they're charging. So not while you're swinging, but while it's charging, you're actually going to block heavy attacks. So sort of cycling between these stances adds a nice mechanic to the greatsword that gives you something interesting to think about and play with the different abilities. And so when you think about it, there's a 30% swing both in your damage output and in the damage you're taking, whether you're in onslaught stance or defiance stance. So after using the greatsword for a bit, it's just like a pretty cool mechanic to have to pay attention to, and it makes you think a little bit more about the order of your abilities and how you're trying to rotate stuff so you can kind of maintain the effective stance you want for the whole time you're doing battle with the greatsword. Even though I would consider this pretty much like an offensive greatsword build, it's a little bit focused on mobility and self-healing. And that's why we're going 11 deep in Defiance to get this Undying Defiance stance. But to complement the bow, you're basically using it to trade in melee. You want to get out effective damage, but you also want to keep yourself alive. And so this build that I've put together is essentially what I think is a perfect mix of damage, utility, and self-healing that can come from the greatsword and really complement this sort of assassin bow style that we're playing with. So you'll see right off the bat, we have 2 abilities in Onslaught and 1 in Defiance. So you basically have 2 abilities to gain the Onslaught stance for 10 seconds, and you have 1 ability to gain the Defiance stance for 10 seconds. So we're going to start off in the Onslaught tree. First one you're going to grab is Heavy Blade, which is going to give you 15% armor pen on your heavy attacks. A huge part of my greatsword combos are heavy attacks. I don't light attack that much, mainly because of the awesome benefits you get for heavy attacks when you're in either onslaught stance or defiant stance. So then picking up our two kind of main damage abilities in Relentless Rush, which is a little bit more of a mobility tool than a damage ability, and then Skyward Slash, which is kind of like your main fucking blast with the Greatsword. A really cool ability, really satisfying to use. Actually has really good homing, so you can use it from pretty far away, and that first attack will like dash you forward a little bit and connect like further than a lot of other weapons would. And then kind of critically, right after we get Skyward Slash, we got to get this first upgrade, Skyfall Sword, and that's going to give you that follow-up attack that lets you kind of do the uppercut and then finish it with a huge kind of downward blast. And then 5th point, we're going to grab Calamity Counter, and so this is your Defiant Stance ability. And so now you have 2 abilities to gain Onslaught Stance and a 3rd ability to gain Defiant Stance, and so you can start thinking about how you want to kind of cycle those. Calamity Counter, you can basically think about it like Riposte from the Rapier, where you get like this 2-second window where you block, but stamina damage is reduced by 90%, so you're barely taking any stamina damage when you do block, and so you can kind of use it as a little defensive window to get you some space and a reset. The coolest thing about this ability is if you time it right, especially with like in PvE, if you're paying attention to the way the NPCs are attacking, if you time it, or if you just have like multiple mobs attacking you, if you get up to 3 blocks in that 2-second window, it becomes more effective. So it always deals the same amount of weapon damage, but 1 block it staggers, 2 blocks it staggers longer, and then 3 blocks or more, it'll cause like a big knockback that'll actually like put people on their ass. And then the ability has Grit intuitively, which is really good for us in a Dex build because we don't have the Strength Grit perk. And then you can reactivate it with Light Attack like as soon as you want. So if you don't want to wait for the 2-second window, or if you see you get hit once and another attack isn't going to come in the next second or whatever, you can just rip a Light Attack and get right out of it. And then as soon as you come out of this, you are in Defiant Stance. And I think the coolest thing about Defiant Stance is you can sort of trade with heavy attacks, and when you're charging up your heavy, you're going to be blocking all incoming damage. And so, especially if you have like a couple mobs on you, or you're like in a low health situation, using Calamity Counter and then transitioning into Defiant Stance and like trading with heavy attacks that are going to be blocking as they're charging is a pretty good tactic. So then we're going to jump back over to Onslaught. We're going to grab this little passive that's actually insane. And so Critical Comeback, become energized by landing a critical hit and gain 5 stamina and 5% base health per second for 5 seconds. So every time you get a crit with a Greatsword now, so this has a 10-second cooldown, internal cooldown, but every time you get a crit with a Greatsword, every 10 seconds, you're going to actually get 25 stamina and 25% base health over the next 5 seconds. So this is a massive tool for kind of sustaining and regenning as you're fighting and trading with the Greatsword. And then we're going to jump back and grab this Jagged Counter, the first upgrade of Calamity Counter, and that's basically going to give you a bleed stack when you counter, and this is going to scale with the power level. So like every block you get is going to add a stack. So like if you get to 3 blocks, you're going to actually get a triple bleed stack rolling. And something else to note, if you don't get any blocks, you shouldn't get a bleed at all because it's only per power level. But at 3 blocks, you're going to be chunking for 15% weapon damage every second for 6 seconds. So pretty strong bleed if you get the blocks down. And then 8th point, we're going to grab Unflinching Blade. And so this gives grit to your heavy attacks. And so since heavy attacks are kind of the main part of your attack chain with Greatsword, and because we're in a Dex build and we don't have that Strength Grit perk, this is super clutch for us. And then it's also just going to give you an extra 5% bleed for 6 seconds after you get a heavy. So super dope talent there. Now we're going to jump back over to Onslaught and finish upgrading our 2 abilities. So first we're grabbing this Relentless Power that's going to give you a 10% Empower after you do this Relentless Rush for 10 seconds. Keep in mind that these kind of weapon-based Empowers will drop off if you weapon swap. Same with like the haste stuff. And then 10th point, we're going to get Adaptive Rush. And so this is basically going to turn your Relentless Rush into a little more of a utility thing, where when you're in Onslaught stance, it's going to root for 1 second, and then when you're in Defiant stance, it's going to heal you for 15% of the damage done. And so when you're looking at using Relentless Rush, a lot of times you want to open the fight with either Skyward Slash or Calamity Counter. So you have those stances rolling when you go to use Relentless Rush. And if you're using it offensively, like chasing someone down, you can get a quick root before the slow. Or if you're trying to get away, you can get a quick root before the slow. And then if you use it right after your Calamity counter, especially on like a couple mobs, you're going to actually heal for 15% of the damage done. And that's going to stack with the Undying Defiance that we're going to get as the keystone in the last one. And so like within 3 seconds of like effectively blocking with Calamity counter, and using, if you use Relentless Rush in that window, you're actually going to be getting 30% self-healing off of that damage. So pretty nuts stack there. And then we're jumping back over to Defiance. We're going to grab Arrow Deflection. So this basically makes it so you can block ranged attacks. So arrows, bullets, magic, you can now block those with your Greatsword. And in my opinion, being able to block while you have a bow is really strong. And that's one of the reasons why I loved the Shield Archer build, the bow, sword, and shield so much, is it gives you just have a lot of sort of utility and defensive stuff you can work with the shield, and being able to actually block ranged attacks instead of being forced to trade with your own damage. And then 12th point we're going to grab is this Guarded Shift. This one is like, it works really well with the one we just got, Arrow Deflection, because like if you're blocking ranged attacks, it's going to just automatically shift you into Defiance stance after 2 seconds. You know, sort of like a little like more niche usage on this one, but gives you a reliable way to like enter Defiance stance on command. So it's not going to work out of combat, so you can't like use it before you start combat to start combat in Defiance stance, but at any window when you're getting pressured, if you just hold block for 2 seconds, you're going to be entering that Defiance stance where you get the blocks on heavy attacks and the 15% reduced damage. And so a little more like niche utility in this one. And then 13th, we're grabbing Faultless Defender. So this is going to reduce stamina damage by half when you are blocking attacks just after you're raising your guard, or with Guard Point, which is the block you get when you are charging heavy attacks when you're in Defiance stance. And then just as a little bonus, every time you actually get hit, it's going to inflict a 5% rend for 10 seconds against melee attackers. And so that can stack up to 3 times. So if you get hit 3 times by the same person, they're going to be taking 15% more damage from you. 14th, we're going to grab Critical Calamity. And so this is going to give Calamity counter a 25% increased crit chance on that counter attack. And then if you're in Onslaught stance, you're going to get another 25% crit chance on top of that. So 50% crit chance in Onslaught stance on that counter attack. And then in Defiance stance, it's actually going to heal you for 20% of its damage, but it will still have that base 25% crit chance. For this one, I kind of just let it happen instead of trying to line it up, because the way you use Calamity counter is very much reactively. A lot of times you use it just on a moment's notice to block incoming attacks. It can be kind of hard to plan ahead for which stance you're going to be in, and so I kind of just let it flow, and whichever one I'm in, that's what gets blasted out, and it's going to help either way. And then 15th, we're going up to the top again and grabbing Perfect Vigilance. So this is going to make it so if you're at full health, and you take damage, that damage is going to be reduced by 20%, and then you're going to gain a 20% Fortify, which is damage reduction for 3 seconds. So especially for questing, this is just going to give you more sustain and like more protection as you're getting like hit by mobs randomly. And then right after that, a similar talent, we're going to grab Wary Posture, where after you gain Defiance stance, the next damage taken within 5 seconds is reduced by 25%. So obviously, this is good anytime you enter Defiance stance, but also this works well with that Guarded Shift we picked up, where if you are blocking for 2 seconds and shift into Defiance stance, you're going to trigger this baby and get 25% damage reduction on the next thing that hits you. And then 17th, we're getting this Blade Homing, and so this is going to give you a 3% damage buff for every Greatsword buff on you. The stances do count as a buff. So anytime you're in a stance, you're getting 3% right off the bat. And then every time you get a crit, you get your critical comeback buff, which is going to count towards this. When you do your Relentless Rush and you gain that 10% in power for 10 seconds, that's going to count toward this. So there's some nice synergy within this tree, and it's kind of just like a passive damage buff that you pick up as you're using your other abilities. Actually, after I took a little bit of a closer look at this one, you are going to get a buff from Perfect Vigilance when you get that 20% Fortify, so that will count. You're going to get a buff from Wary Posture after you gain Defiance stance, which is that 25% damage reduction for the next attack within 5 seconds, so that's going to count as a buff. And then from the final talent we're picking up at the very end, Step and Strike, you're going to be getting 10% in power every time you dodge. So actually 3 more things that are going to count as buffs toward this Blade Honing, but keep in mind that it is a max of 4 buffs, but I think in the end we'll end up getting a lot of value out of this because we actually have 5 different abilities that will proc buffs, and then we have the 2 stance buffs on top of that. So 7 different things to proc buffs in this build. And so a lot of times you're going to have all 4 stacks. You'll be getting that 12% extra damage with the Greatsword. So finally, we're going to get down to the Keystone rune with our 18th point, which is Undying Defiance. And so this is going to heal for 5% of the damage from all attacks with the Greatsword. And then if you attack within 3 seconds of blocking, you're actually going to heal for 15% of the damage dealt instead. And so this is blocking either with Calamity Counter or blocking while you're charging heavy attacks in Defiance Stance with Guard Point, or whether you're just normal blocking. And so you're going to get a ton of value out of this bonus healing after blocking, and this stacks very nicely with the other Greatsword abilities that are giving you that self-healing. So Critical Comeback and Adaptive Rush. Finally, the last talent point we are going to drop in is Step and Strike. And I spent a lot of time thinking about this one. I was leaning towards the final upgrade of Skyward Slash at first, Sickening Slash, but after much contemplation, I really think this one wins out. And that's because not only are you getting this 10% in power buff for 10 seconds every time you dodge, which we're dodging a lot in this medium armor dex build, you're also going to get 10 stamina back on hit when you land attacks that are empowered by this effect. So every time you dodge, the next 3 attacks are going to get this 10% of power, which, by the way, counts toward blade homing. But on top of that, you're going to be getting 10 stamina from each hit. And so this actually lets you cut even when you're in onslaught stance, when your heavy attacks are charging faster, but they cost 10 stamina. So now with Step and Strike, every time you dodge for the next 3 heavies that you do, if you're in onslaught stance, they're actually not going to cost any stamina at all because you're spending it, but then you're getting it back from Step and Strike. And then when you're in Defiance stance, you're actually going to be gaining 10 stamina, and that's going to help your stamina bar sustain as you're blocking those incoming attacks as you're charging your heavies in Defiance stance. So after thinking about it quite a bit, Step and Strike is really the perfect final talent to really round out this Greatsword build and just make it that much more powerful. Powerful. All right, so the way you want to use the Greatsword in combat with this build is essentially as another damage tool alongside your bow, but for melee, but then also some good utility and self-healing and defensives to either keep you alive to keep trading in melee and give you that edge, or to give you space to switch back to your bow and go back into bow combos. And so just talking about the Greatsword right now, basically what you're going to want to do is, as a mob is running up to you from shooting it with your bow on the opener, you're going to want to start combat with a Skyward Slash. And the reason that is because it has really good homing on that first attack. So as something's running up to you, even if it's pretty far away, you can get that homing to kind of dash yourself forward, get that upper strike cut, and then into the big 140% downward slash. And so that's going to be some big initial damage and gap closer to start your Greatsword combo. And then from there, you are in Defiance stance. And so you're going to be having 15% increased damage. Your heavy attacks are also going to be charging twice as fast, but they're going to cost a little stamina. So this is like a really good window to trade a couple quick heavy attacks, especially if you can line up a dodge with the enemy's first attack. A lot of times you can weave in a couple really big heavy attacks before you even get hit. And then from here, you're either going to want to onslaught rush out, and because you're in onslaught stance, this is actually going to give you that bonus from adaptive rush, and it's going to root them in place for 1 second, and it's also going to apply the normal 20% slow for 4 seconds. And so you can use it to get a little more damage out and to get yourself some space and get that root, and then switch back to your bow now that you have some room and start trading bow combos again. Or if you want to keep trading in melee, or if you have like multiple mobs on you where you want to go a little more defensive, you're going to want to look for an opportunity to use your Calamity Counter, which is the block. And so if you're paying attention to your enemy's attacks and kind of how often they're coming, especially in PvE where they're a little more predictable, you can look for that window where they're going to hit you multiple times, and that's going to give you kind of the most bang for your buck out of your Calamity Counter. And if you get up to 3 blocks, it's going to give you a fat knockback and knockdown. So that's going to give you a ton of space. And then from there, you can either continue trading in melee, especially if you have like multiple mobs together. This is a great time to cleave because you're taking 15% reduced damage, but you're also blocking all incoming attacks while you're charging your heavy attacks in Defiance stance. And so after you use Calamity Counter, it's either a really good window to trade some of these heavy attacks without worrying about blocking or dodging, because your block sort of, you know, half active as you're charging. And then as your Defiance stance window is expiring, the 10 seconds, you're going to want to use a Relentless Rush, and that's going to give you a little more damage, create some space, reactivate Onslaught stance if you want to keep trading with sword. But when you do Relentless Rush in Defiance stance, you're going to get that 15% heal from damage done. So if you're cleaving a big group of mobs after you do Calamity Counter and you're getting that block value in, and then you trade out with a Relentless Rush, that's going to slow all of them. You're going to hit multiple mobs for 15% healing on your damage done, and it's going to give you some space to switch back to your bow and start ripping your bow combos while you're waiting on your Greatsword cooldowns to come back up. All right, so I think this is a perfect time to talk about sort of the synergy in combat between the Greatsword and bow, and kind of take a look at the full combo and how you're going to use everything together to sort of just completely delete stuff and also get a bunch of crazy self-healing from your bow headshots and also from a lot of your Greatsword stuff. So pretty much every encounter you approach, you're going to want to be at least 10 meters away, and you're going to want to do a dodge into that heavy headshot combo. And this is going to give you that 100% increase bonus damage from all those crazy stacking talents we talked about in bow. And you're going to want to cancel the very end of that first heavy attack with a pen shot animation cancel. And so you're basically charging your heavy attack, let it fly into an instant pen, and then from there, I'll cancel the end of the pen shot animation with a dodge. That's going to give you a little more space, refresh your damage debuff, and then right after that second dodge, you're going to pull back a second heavy attack, let that baby rip, and then cancel the end of that animation with an explosive shot or a poison shot, whichever one you're running. And that's going to get your dot rolling on the target, so either your burn or your poison. And by this time, the target's going to be, coming up to you, closing the gap. Unless it's a ranged target, you can just keep shredding it with bow. But, most mobs that are melee are going to be up to you at this point. And so right after you rip that explosive shot or poison shot, you're going to want to whip out the Greatsword and get ready for a Skyward Slash. And the Skyward Slash, like we talked about, has really good homing. And so this is going to let you kind of close the gap a little preemptively before your target kind of knows or to register what's going on. And on NPCs, you actually get a little stagger out of this. And this is going to put you in melee range and start you into the Greatsword combo we talked about. And so kind of looking at the full combo, after you do your Skyward Slash, you're going to want to be trading those 15% increased damage, half speed heavy attacks from the Onslaught stance that you're getting, and then basically using a Relentless Rush or Calamity Counter depending on the situation. So a lot of times, if there's multiple mobs, Calamity Counter is a really good way to block a bunch of that damage, get it fully stacked to where you have 3 charges, and then get a huge AoE knockback that's going to put everyone on their ass and give them that fat 3-stack bleed. And a lot of times once you get that, if you're at full health, you can just dodge back and kind of go back into your bow combos. You're generally going to want to save your evade shot for when you need it. It's just like a really good defensive tool, and it's not necessarily, a great part of any combo. I mean, you could definitely use it for the damage as part of a combo and like to give you a little more space and get that stagger, but I generally tend to save it for when I really need it or when I'm in trouble. But the other thing you can do after you do that, big Calamity Counter is do some trading while you're in Defiance stance, and that's going to give you that block while you're charging your heavy attack. So it's not going to block while you actually swing the heavy attack, but as you're charging the heavy attack, you're going to be blocking all that incoming damage, and you're going to be getting that increased healing after blocking for every heavy attack you're landing in that window. And then a lot of times you want to finish that combo with Relentless Rushing through everything while you're still in Defiance stance. That's going to give you that 15% heal, and if you happen to block anything with guard point, just randomly while you're swinging your heavy attacks, that's actually going to jump that up to a 30% heal off of damage done. And if you're doing it through multiple mobs, you can just get a fat self-heal from it. And then a lot of times shit is dead by this point, but if it's not, as soon as you get space with Onslaught Rush, you're going to want to switch back to your bow and kind of start cycling your bow cooldowns again. So it's sort of this really nice rhythm between doing this like bow assassin open and then going into this really feel-good Greatsword trading And then a lot of times by that point, the combat is over. And if it's not, you kind of use the window of Relentless Rush to give you some space and switch back to bow and start going into your bow combos again. All right, so last thing I kind of want to collectively cover is more on the gear side of things. So looking at armor type, perks, attributes, this kind of stuff. And so at its core, this is a dex build. You're really going to want to pump most of what you got into dex. And you can pick up a little bit of con along the way. I think if you're struggling with survivability, start investing some points into constitution. You're not going to want to go too heavy with it. I think a couple of really good markers for the constitution attribute is getting to 50 makes your pots and everything 20% stronger, and then getting to 100 is going to increase your max health by 10%. And so in this build, like leveling, I think the highest you're going to want to go is 100. And then I think at max level, especially for PvP, getting up to that 150 con perk that's going to give you that 10% crit reduction is really clutch for sort of that resilience side of PvP. But I'm pretty much never going to go over 150 con in this build. A lot of times when I do bow builds like this with a dex melee weapon, I'll like attribute up to 110 con, and then everything else goes into dex. And so basically that lets you just eat that 40 con food, some seasoned rabbit, some tasty, tasty seasoned rabbit, right before you're going to go into a dungeon or PvP or whatever. And that'll jump your con from 110 to 150 and give you that 10% crit reduction perk. But otherwise, your damage and your dex number is kind of pretty much always going to be the same. And so that's how I like to run it with the attributes. Every other attribute is going to be completely useless to you pretty much in this build. Strength will help your sword a little bit, but dex helps your sword and your bow directly. And so you're pretty much going to want to just go full dex with that little bit of con we talked about. The dex perks obviously synergize really well with the bow. They do synergize pretty decently with Greatsword. Not quite as well, but still pretty good. So I would say the main three are going to be this 10% increase to critical hit chance that you get at 50, and then the dodges costing 10 less stamina at 150, and then the 300 perk that gives you that guaranteed critical after a dodge. And then because you have that slow on your onslaught rush, you will get the benefit from this 251 with the 10% critical hit damage against stun, slow to rooted enemies. And then the other two, you're actually not going to benefit the Greatsword pretty much at all. They obviously still benefit your bow really well, but the 5% thrust damage and the 10% bonus to backstab and headshot damage is pretty much not going to benefit your Greatsword unless you're like PvEing and the tank has aggro and you can like consistently smack something in the back with the Greatsword. And then we already covered the con perks. I think, going to 150 is as good as it gets for this build. For armor type, I really favor medium armor in this build. Medium armor synergizes really well with dex because you get 10% reduced stamina on dodge from the armor, and then you get another 10 from the 150 dex perk. And so your dodges are actually only going to cost 30 stamina. And so without any extra perks doing anything to your stamina, you're actually going to get 4 full dodges in a stamina bar, which is pretty nuts. And I think the little hop on medium armor feels pretty good. It feels like they've changed the dodges quite a few times. At this point, they all feel decent, but medium kind of gives you that perfect middle ground, especially in PvE, where you're not super squishy like you are in light, so you can actually like take some hits, especially if you fuck up, and not just like instantly die. At the same time, you're still getting really high damage output, and you're getting this really nice stamina bonus for dodges that really enables you to play a little more like mobile. Like you can use dodging as a bigger part of your combat because you can do it more than other people in other builds. And then also it synergizes really well with onslaught stance and your heavy attacks costing 10 extra stamina when they're hitting really fast. Having the reduced stamina on your dodges from the dex and from the medium armor really gives you kind of a bigger stamina bar to work with to weave in those heavy onslaught attacks for 10 stam. So for actual like armor distribution, a really good medium distribution that I like a lot that actually gives you a ton of variation in what you can do, especially when you're kind of honing in on gear at max level, is going heavy, head, hands, boots, medium chest, light pants. And this is going to give you, I think there's one other combo that works, but this is the one I've always done. that kind of gives you maximal armor for the amount of weight you're able to carry and still be in medium. So this is actually going to be more effective than just rocking 5 medium armor pieces. You're going to get more total armor. The way the weight works in this game is it considers the shield as well. And so in light armor, if you're wearing 5 light armor pieces and a round shield, you'll be right at the 13 weight cap and you'll still be light. If you're rocking full medium armor and a kite shield, you'll be right at the 23 pounds and still be medium. And if you're rocking full heavy armor and a tower shield, you'll obviously be as heavy as it gets. But if you're not rocking a sword and shield, this is actually going to give you more armor for the amount of weight you can carry and still be medium. The other really cool thing about building like this is if you want to flip to heavy, all you got to trade out is your chest and your legs, and then your full kind of heavy beef boy. As far as gems go for armor, I think all of the ones that give you the kind of rounded damage reduction are good. So opal if you want full elemental resistance against magic, malachite or diamond if you want kind of that middle ground, or onyx if you want kind of the full-blown physical reduction. I usually go with one of the ones in the middle. I think rocking full diamond, especially for leveling, is like a really kind of good, easy way to go because it gives you a little bit more heavy physical leaning reduction, but you still get a little bit of that elemental rolling as well. And then as far as gems for your weapons, I think there's a couple good options. I always have really favored the opal for bow because of how much you're dodging to keep that damage buff enabled. Most of the time when I'm shooting the bow in combat, I'm not at full stamina, so opal basically gives me 15% extra damage like most of the time when I'm ripping my bow. I think another really good option for leveling, especially in this kind of build where you're using bow as like kind of an open assassin tool and then switching to greatsword, is the diamond. And so anytime you're starting off a fight at full health, like that whole opening sequence before that mob gets to you is going to be giving you that 15% increased damage as well. If you wanted to go for the Mondo opening headshot, you could rock an onyx, and that's going to give you that huge like 30% damage on the opener that's going to stack really nicely with all that other 100% damage stacking on the opener that we were looking at in the bow talents. So I would probably go with one of those 3. I really favor the opal for greatsword as well because of how much it leans on stamina and how often you will not be at full stamina when you're using it. I think another really good option could be the jasper for when you take a hit, you get that increased damage for the next little bit. You're not going to want to rock an elemental gem of any kind because we're not leaning into int and all, and so the only thing it's going to do is make half of your damage magic and half of it physical. It's not going to actually give you any significant increase unless that specific mob has more physical reduction or more magic reduction. But overall, you're not really going to get a damage boost from it, which is why I prefer kind of one of these 3. What else is there? There's a lot in this game. Am I missing anything? So the last thing to kind of take a look at on the gearing side of things is the perks. And unfortunately, bow perks have always kind of been trash, in my opinion. None of them are really that good. They added this empowering explosive arrow one, and that's going to give you basically a 4% damage increase on your next shot after you do explosive shot. And so that perk is worth 4% damage for one shot. That's probably like the best bow perk there is, unfortunately. They did change the Rain of Arrows one to make the slow and the bleed last longer, 10% longer, so that one has a little bit of value too. Man, the poison shot one is so bad. You get a 3% weaken for 6 seconds. I mean, like, come on, man. It's like so small. And then, only getting 4 stamina back for the evade shot one, 3% cooldown reduction, just like very minimal numbers. And so I think rather than focusing on bow perks, it's a really good idea to focus on some of the better like armor perks that you can grab. There's honestly like so many kind of like niche perks now that it's going to be really hard to kind of like nail any down. A couple that I think are really important on your ring, you're really going to want to try to get thrust damage. And so like at max level, that's going to give you pretty much 5% more thrust damage, which is going to benefit your bow damage very much. If you're leaning more into your greatsword damage, you could switch that to slashing. I think leeching on your ring is another really clutch one to pick up if you can. I think on your necklace, getting health to give you that bigger health window is a really good one to try to scoop. And then on earrings, regenerating which just gives you 0.5% health regeneration every second, I think would pair beautifully with a sort of like lifesteal bow greatsword build that we got going here. And then another really insane one for earring that I like can't live without at this point is this purifying toast. And that's going to basically give your regen pot a cleanse. And so you can basically use your regen potion not only for the gradual heal, but also to cleanse yourself of a burn, of a poison, a slow, like pretty much any debuff you have that you want to cleanse real quick. You can use your regen pot as a cleanse, and like that by itself is so fucking clutch, man. I cannot tell you how many times my regen pot has saved me by giving me that, you know, that healing over time combined with like dropping some really critical like bleed or burn or whatever is happening. And then, you know, if you're looking for rare items, luck is obviously a cool one to grab. What else? The elemental version and the physical version are really good perks just to kind of take overall less damage. Refreshing is just like a really good perk by itself. So all the refreshing perks are pretty good. Refreshing just as like a by itself with the flak cooldown reduction, or refreshing evasion, which I think is probably a little higher value with this build because of the amount that you're actually dodging and the increased stamina cost on your dodge from the medium armor and the dex perk. Really gets you like a lot of value out of refreshing evasion. So those refreshing ones are always solid. Cooldown reduction, always a good thing. And then there's a couple of these sort of like crazy newer ones that they've added over the last you know, few months that do things like I'm trying to think of the one. There's one where when you like dodge through an enemy attack, you get like fortify or heal or stamina. Like those shirking ones are pretty solid. Let's see. Oh, this sturdy energy one is like actually really clutch for the way we're using greatswords. So when blocking a hit while below 30% stamina, gain 38% increased stamina regen for 6 seconds. So like that one's actually going to be really clutch because of the amount of stamina you're consuming when you're trading with your greatsword. So like, you know, when you're in defiant stance and you're trading heavy attacks, every time you block while you're charging a heavy attack, that's going to consume stamina. And then when you're in onslaught stance, you know, every heavy attack going faster is going to cost you 10 stamina. So I think pretty often in this build, you're going to be blocking hits while below 30% stamina and getting that extra stamina regen at that point to keep you from, you know, running out of stamina and being exhausted until it regens, I think could be really clutch, actually. And then finally, taking a look at the Greatsword perks, which I haven't really taken a close look at yet. There's actually a couple decent ones for Greatsword, definitely better than Bow. So this energizing counter one for Calamity counter is really good, actually. When Calamity counter is activated, immediately gain 10 stamina. So just free stamina if you have that one, that's a solid one. And then I think this Relentless Freedom is actually really solid too, which makes it so activating Relentless Rush removes roots and slows. And so, you know, being kind of your main mobility tool with your melee weapon, and especially to get yourself space, that's actually going to be super clutch for PvP, you know, catching like a VG root or something like that. You can just fucking instantly cleanse out of it and get your distance by hitting Relentless Rush. So I think those two are kind of the main ones. The Skyward Nullification, hitting a foe with Skyward Slash removes one of their buffs. Remaining buffs have the duration reduced by 10%. You know, especially in PvE, it's not super often that a foe is going to be running up to you with like a bunch of meaningful buffs. So I think, you know, if you're looking at Greatsword perks for this build specifically, going for Steadfast Purification and Relentless Freedom, I would honestly prioritize Relentless Freedom for that root removal. That's kind of OP. Literally, like that one perk is better than all the bow perks put together. Unfortunately. All right, so that's pretty much all I have to say about this build for leveling. Like always, this went way longer than I thought it was going to. I end up always having much more to say than I think I do. So hopefully you enjoyed. Hopefully you got a lot of value out of this. I might try to make a couple more leveling guides for some kind of cool niche builds that I've been looking at. If, you know, this one is well received and people are liking it, I'm also planning on doing like a full level 60 PvP build guide for this build that's going to focus more on the level 60 and like PvP aspects of it rather than the leveling. And it's going to be similar in a lot of ways, but there'll probably be a couple tweaks here and there to make it, you know, kind of like maximally viable for PvP. So if you're interested in that, keep an eye out. And other than that, yeah, like I said earlier, I'm going to be trying to live stream the progression of this build on a fresh server on my other channel, which is Zikorik Roleplays. And then on this channel, when I'm doing kind of more of the max level PvP build guide stuff, I'm actually going to try to start live streaming on this channel while I'm doing that to kind of give people a window into the build progression and, you know, a chance to get to know me better and ask me questions and stuff like that. So anyways, I hope you are enjoying your adventures in Eternum. I hope your fresh start experience is awesome. And I hope a lot of people end up giving this build a try and really enjoying it, because I think it's one of the really fun ones. And I think for damage and efficiency, you can really just mow stuff over at a really satisfying clip. So that's all I got. Take care, and I will catch you in the next one. Peace.